And I want to thank everybody for logging onto this call and getting to hear from some seasoned CASAs, supervisors, peer coordinators. The point of this is to not only talk about some of those things, some of those questions that you might want to ask a supervisor or somebody who's maybe had a case a little bit longer than you, but also maybe some of those things that I can improve in pre-service, especially if we're having the same questions come up. I might not know about it because you're not asking me the questions, right? And so finding this out helps me improve the pre-service experience, especially because of the format. It's kind of like we're doing this the best we can. Well, now I can do even better. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to introduce those who are on the panel right now, and then have them talk about how long they've been in CASA, what capacity they serve, and let's just go with that. So I'm going to start with Judy. Hi, Judy.
Hi. I have been CASA, it will actually be 2 years in November. And in March of this year, I was trained to be a peer coordinator. And Karen actually is one of my CASAs. So love her, she's great. And I guess that's it. Is that what you're wanting to know?
Yeah. We're just getting started here. So there'll be lots more questions.
Okay.
Chris.
Hi all, I'm Chris Hansen. I have been with CASA for probably 18 or 19 years. I had cases when I first started as a volunteer, and then I moved on to staff. So I've been with staff for about 16 years. I supervise all of the advocates that are in Broomfield. So I have a fairly small caseload. I work just part-time. And I don't currently have any cases, but I feel like I have 17 cases because I work so closely with the advocates and the departments and the families out in Broomfield. So I like supporting volunteers, advocates, and helping them be successful on their cases. So thank you.
Candy.
Hi, I've been a CASA for coming on 5 years in October. I've been a peer coordinator for 4 of those years. And I really enjoy working with other CASAs and helping them with their cases. I just got a message from one of my advocates this morning that she won't be able to make it to her FTM. So she asked me if I could go to that for her. So it's very nice to have that interaction with other people and to be so familiar with other cases that are going on. So that's one of the things that I really enjoy, as well as I also have a case of my own.
Thank you. And Bob, last but not least, Bob.
There we go.
There we go.
Good morning. I've been a CASA for about 3 years now, and I'm just starting my 3rd case. And as far as my capacity within the organization, I guess I'm kind of at the muggle level. I just do the interaction with the families the best I can.
Great. Thank you so much. And then I'm going to go ahead and have Kirk introduce himself.
All right. Hi there, everyone. Kirk here and Valzander. Of the two, I'm the CASA. He is not. I'm going into 3rd year. Same case that seems to be lumbering its way to a conclusion, perhaps next month. And no role other than CASA and lap furniture.
Thank you. Nicole.
My name is Nicole. I am an advocate. I've only been an advocate for 4 months, but I am deeply involved in my case, and Suhad is my supervisor, and I'm just absolutely loving every minute of it. It's hard, but it's so incredibly fulfilling.
Great. That's so good to hear. Karen.
Hello. Oh, am I muted?
No, you're fine. We can hear you.
Okay, okay. I have been a CASA for, I think it's coming up on a year now. I'm working on my second case, and Judy is my supervisor, and I'm having a blast with that. And yeah, I think my case is kind of not heavy lifting case, so but involved and good. So yeah, so I think that's it.
Great. Thank you. And Miss Cheryl.
Good morning.
Good
My name's
morning.
Sharon. And I've just actually am getting sworn in on the 11th, so I'm fairly new with CASA, and I'm excited to hear everybody's time with it, and the opportunity, and I just can't wait to have that same fulfilling experience because it sounds great, and I just want to be able to help.
Oh, great. Good. Good. Thank you. So, part of it is that once we're sworn in, a lot of times, we might feel a little bit like, not sure what the next step is, or where do we go from here, or, building that relationship with the family. So I'm going to ask the panelists, what's some advice that you can give somebody who's just being sworn in about building that relationship, especially if it's changed in our climate here? We're going to have changes coming and going for the foreseeable future. But some advice that you might give a new CASA.
I can remember with my first case, I actually am on my second one now. And I'll be honest, my first case was really easy, way different than the case I'm on now. But I was a little bit scared the first time that I went to meet with the family, because it's just kind of fear of the unknown and something new. And I was able to meet with them in person because my first case was in December of 2019. And I remember when I went in, I greeted them, and the main thing I did, I just listened. And now and then I would ask a question, just, how things were going. But I do know that the more I just sat there and listened and nodded, the more they talked. And every time I went to visit, I was learning all kinds of things that maybe I wouldn't have learned, except, I just nodded and smiled and listened, and a lot of stuff just came pouring out. So I just want to say that with your first case, your first visit, it is kind of nerve-wracking. It's new. And I know now it might be via Zoom. I don't know how the case is going. I know when I visit families now, even when during COVID, we would all mask up. So I still visited in person because I like that personal connection. But just know that after the first visit, it does get easier. It just, you just have to smile and nod and get through that first visit. And compliments always help. If you can find something to compliment them on, that's a huge icebreaker. If you can say, oh, wow, your house is really neat, or, this kiddo's just adorable, or whatever, just find ways to kind of break the ice by saying kind words. So.
Oh, that's great advice. Does anybody else want to add to that?
I will. When I went on my first case, my supervisor had agreed to go with me on the very first visit. And so I arranged the time, and then as it turned out, she couldn't go with me. And rather than reschedule, I just went ahead and went by myself. And it turned out just fine. But I have realized since then that It's often helpful to go with a caseworker or a GAL, especially when you're brand new, just because they are so seasoned and they know the questions to ask and the way in, and it's just easier to tag along with somebody if you can. And if you can't, that's okay too, because I did just fine going by myself. But I've learned, even now, I'm on my third case right now, and going with the caseworker that I have now, I don't always go with her, but when I do, I always learn a little something extra just for hearing the questions that she asked the family.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And I think one of the most important things you can tell the family is that you're a volunteer. You don't belong to social services, you don't belong to the courts, you're a volunteer, you're an independent investigator. And that a lot of times kind of breaks the ice once they know that you're not under anybody else's thumb. And even though you may come to visit with the caseworker or the guardian ad litem, you're an independent investigator and you independently tell the judge what you've observed. So that helps out a lot too, I found.
Oh, good. Good.
And that you're there then because you want to be, not because you're assigned.
Right, right.
That's very true. That whole volunteer thing is very important to people. I've had.
And that
with my
that
kids.
you usually have one case where they might have 25 or 30 cases, so you can devote the time to that case.
Right.
Bob, would
would-
you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would certainly echo the things that the others have said. I think what I have found is the connection with the caseworker and the GAL, to me, is very important. Some of them will relate to you more closely than some of the others. As was mentioned, they have who knows how many cases they're trying to juggle. And so this is, in some cases, just one of many that they're working on. But I found it's important, as was mentioned, not only because they will give you insight, but because you'll learn from them. I pick up something, as was mentioned earlier, every time I interact with them. I think it's important, or it has been for me in the 3 cases I've had, to try to make that visit with at least one of the others at that initial interaction and discussion. And to dovetail into something that was mentioned here about the fact that we're a volunteer, it took me a while into my first case to realize that once the family comes underneath this umbrella of human services, suddenly we're talking about therapy, or in some cases, multiple therapy sessions, kids going to and from school and having school interaction there at the therapy level sometimes. And then at the same time, the adults have to try to earn a living. And so the human services environment, once they come under this umbrella, just puts a lot of things out there for these folks to have to deal with. And we're one more thing for them to have to interact with. And I think it's important that we not try to, or at least for me, I not try to burden them with a lot of additional visits and interactions, because I know in my first case, they were just looking for some time where they could work on their own without having people interrupting them. And I think it's important to at least understand that, in many cases, acknowledge it.
Oh, that's great advice. Yeah, thank you for that.
I think it's also important to realize too that you have many different opportunities for visiting depending on the situation in your case. It's not only a home visit, it could be a foster visit. When kids are in foster care, you can visit at the foster home. You can also visit or observe visits with parents. You can go to schools if your kids are school age. You can go to a lot of different places that don't directly impact whoever has custody of the kids at the time also.
If I could
That's
add
a, go ahead, Bob.
Excuse me. I was just going to say one more thing to what Candy just mentioned. I have found in at least 2 of the 3 cases I've been involved in, that oftentimes the caseworker or the GAL either hasn't made the time or their schedule's full enough that they don't reach out as maybe we could to the schools. And my interaction with the school actually brought some things to the table that hadn't been discussed, which gave me a good feeling. And but a lot of times you'll take the time to go in and visit the school and talk to their instructors and the people they're interacting with. That can be very, very beneficial to the whole environment.
I want to build, if that's okay, on what Bob and Candy said. This was kind of a big deal for me. Well, even with my first case, but last summer, I'm in a very complicated case right now. And some of them, my kiddos last summer were in 3 different homes in 3 different towns. And it needed to happen, but that's not the norm. But one of the places one of my kiddos was in, they're like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of the visits and the calls and the therapy the kiddos have to go to. I'm just tired of it. And in talking to my GAL and caseworker, we agreed for this one instance, we knew the kiddo was being well taken care of and in a good place. And so I backed off. I just did team visits with the GAL and caseworker once a month, because a place where we didn't want to lose the place where this kiddo was living, have them get burnt out. So I think we have to be very respectful of where the kiddos are, as long as we know they're safe. And I know I have heard, somebody say, well, I got a court order. I'm a CASA and, I can visit whenever I want. But when you call somebody and say, I'm coming by for a visit now, I'm in the area, that usually doesn't work for the parents, and it does not help the relationship. So what I'm trying to get at there is, I think we always need, as CASAs, to be respectful of the parents' time or where the kiddos are living, the foster parents. And yeah, we might have the power because we have a piece of paper, but I think we need to be sure that it works for them too, and try and communicate with them and coordinate with them, because that keeps a smoother relationship going.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you. Thank you. So we brought up visits at the schools. For the panelists, can you guys weigh in on a couple of different things? I'd like to talk about what that looks like when kids are in person, and then how you feel your visits are going when kids are virtual, and maybe some differences or some suggestions to new CASAs, since this is a new reality that we're all trying to navigate.
I'm never shy.
That's why you're on this panel.
I would say that I did a visit in person at one of my kiddos' schools. The only problem was, and I did it with the caseworker and the GAL, because this was the kiddo we were having problems visiting in person it was at the end of the school year. And the only problem was when they scheduled it was during lunch, and we took lunch to this kiddo, which was fine, except what they want to do is they want to eat fast and get to recess. And so if you're going to do it during school, I know taking lunch is a great idea, but most of the times when it's a grade school kiddo, they don't want to use their recess in talking to you. And that's really hard, trying to get a good time to go and not have them miss something that they look forward to every day. So I'll say that about school. And Zoom's always hard because it's hard to keep them engaged, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been visiting 2 of my 3 in school. In fact, that's the only way that I've been able to see the 2 girls. And I started off just contacting, the front office to find out who their teachers are. Then I contact the teachers and I scheduled everything through the teachers. And that so far has worked very well for me. They're very cooperative. They seem eager to help, and it's been great.
That's great. Good. it might be interesting to find out that the subjects that your kids are least thrilled about, and maybe you go during those, maybe they'd really look forward to it, right?
Actually, I haven't encountered that, but
Oh, good. Yeah, I think that's a question that does come up. How do we approach schools? How do we talk to teachers? Who do we go through? And is it a good place to do a visit? And then how do you protect that confidentiality once you're there? You know, at times kids, you know, if you're sitting there having lunch with a kiddo, at some point another kiddo is going to ask what's going on, especially if you're showing up with an attorney. You know, so how do you guys navigate that, especially in that setting where other kids are able to see what's going on and other people are?
We requested our own private room. So we used a classroom that was not being used for a network.
Okay.
And so the kiddos didn't see us meeting with this kiddo or whatever. So that worked out for us.
Okay.
I've found the administrators and the folks, the adults at the school, as Kirk mentioned, have been very cooperative. And I found that the interaction with the adults, it really gives me as much or more information than I had anticipated. As far as observing the kids, we might go by a classroom and look in the window, but I really haven't made an effort, and it's been very comfortable to interact with the kids directly, other than in one instance, the assistant principal said, well, I'll call and have them come up to the office. And the four of us sat down in a little conference room and we chatted a little bit, and that was the extent of it. But I think to the point that was made earlier about the hanging around with the kids when they're trying to interact with their peers, I guess I'm more interested in maybe observing from a distance and seeing how they're interacting with those other kids rather than being involved in directly with them at school, unless it was in a private environment like a little conference room or something. So I haven't made an effort to actually insert myself with the kids when they're with their peers. I think that for me, it creates an awkward situation for them. And as was alluded to earlier, you know, then the kids may start asking questions that may be a little awkward as well. So I'm particularly interested when I go to the school interacting with the adults that are interacting with the kids. And if they have one of these special education, I never can remember the three letters that go with
An
it.
IEP.
IEP, there we go. Talking to that instructor and those adults that have been involved in that, I found to be helpful as well.
I think years ago I had a kiddo and she liked that I brought her lunch. And I said, well, you know, okay. So I brought her lunch on Fridays and we'd sit down and had lunch. And I was nervous about, you know, what's going to, you know, is this going to have an impact on, you know, who's going to, what, you know, it was in my head. And I asked her, I said, well, you know, who do you tell kids that I am? And she says, I tell them you're Becca. Apparently that was good enough. All righty then, end of discussion. So, so that's great advice, especially as we are kind of re-entering schools here where, you know, where all this is going to look. I think it's a terrific place to talk to kiddos. And like Bob said, you get a lot of information from the adults that are working with the kiddos. But we don't have a lot of, you know, basic rules about how to function in school, what's okay, what's not okay. I'm going to take a minute and open it up for questions that you all might have for our seasoned group here, people who have been on cases and are now supervisors and been around. Do you have any questions for them? Yes, Candy.
Before we go on to that, I just want to mention that educational advocacy letter that Carol Lee came up with is a wonderful way to get your foot in the door, to email that to the teachers or to the front office along with your court orders saying that you are actually allowed to come and talk to anybody in school about that. It's a wonderful way to get in the schools to begin with.
Great. And I just want to double check and make sure that Chris knows what she's talking about. So the advocate supervisors would have a copy of that letter?
They should, it may be in our file, but it wouldn't hurt to find it and send it back out to everybody for case openings. Because that's where we usually go over education, and I know I don't have one in my case opening file. So it's got to be somewhere. Maybe Mara knows where it's at, so we
Oh,
can
I'm sure,
research it
yeah.
and find it. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't take much just to have it handy to know to
Yeah.
ask for it.
And just to have it in the case opening pack, so when they open it, they've got that along with their other educational paperwork.
Great. Yeah, that's terrific. Questions for the panelists that you guys are hearing things. Do you have questions?
I have a few.
Go for it. That's what we're here for.
So my case is a dependency case, and throughout the duration of it, there has been no contact with the parents allowed. So I am relying heavily on the caseworker and the GAL for information. And my caseworker is very unresponsive. I believe it's because of the workload. I think she's just very overwhelmed, but there's been information that I have asked for repeatedly, and it's just like dead air. There's nothing there. It's silence. And how do you guys does anyone have any recommendations on how to try and get this information, or how to pursue this caseworker without getting on her last nerve? I don't know. I feel kind of stuck.
I'll give you a couple of reactions here. I ran into a similar situation with a GAL that wasn't all that responsive when I send out some requests. And I found that the person I work with in CASA is Zoe. And I found that reaching out to her in more than one case has been helpful. She either knew, or she would go to somebody in CASA who a roundabout way would get me the information I needed, even if the GAL in that particular case didn't respond. I also have a situation where the parents are not involved. They're either in therapy or one's incarcerated. And the kids are kind of with grandma. And so, yeah, it's been in my case, very positive, because grandma does a great job. The kids love grandma, and but the parents aren't in the picture, and frankly, I hope they're not for a while until they get their act together. But I understand your point about the parents not being involved at all. And it's, in this case, I've got a great caseworker. Usually one or the other seems responsive, and I'll go to Zoe, or in one case, this happened to be an ICWA case, and the tribe was involved, and people kept talking about, well, the tribe says this, or the tribe doesn't say this, or we don't know what the tribe. I finally asked Zoe, I said, can I call the tribal contact? And she said, well, I don't know why not. So I got his number and called him, and I was surprised about some of the information that he gave me. So at some point I'd go through your CASA contact, whoever that might be at the time, and get their guidance. But I wouldn't hesitate, if you're not getting the answers, to request permission to reach out directly to that agency or individual that you're trying to get information about.
Nicole, that's a great question you had, because in my very first case, the caseworker was very nice, but I was warned by my SPC that initially opened the case, and then he quit like right after I started the case, but whatever. He said this caseworker was not very good at communication. And so what I did, when he didn't respond, I just contacted the person the kiddo was living with, a relative. And I just, started the conversation, how things are going. And then eventually I'd work in my little questions that I had for the caseworker, or, I would get the person the kiddo was living with talking about it. And that's kind of how I got some of my answers. The first GAL that I worked with was very nice and eventually would get back with me. But the GAL and caseworker I have now, they're like the 18th. So I am included on everything. But that to me was a hard thing, when you just feel like you're really not part of the team because they don't communicate back to you. And that is hard. But sometimes you can go where the kiddo's living and kind of work your questions in. So.
Okay, thank you for that.
Chris or Candy, did you want to weigh in on that?
If anybody knows the magic bullet, I'd love to know that too. I had a caseworker who was just awful on one of my cases, ended up quitting the case before it was over and leaving a bunch of cases that in the department just hanging. She was just terrible. The GAL that I have right now, I've been on this case for close to a year. I have not had a single response from him in the whole time that I've been on here. So
Oh.
I would be interested in a magic bullet also.
Well, I think, if you go through your peer coordinator or your advocate supervisor first, a lot of times they have a different kind of relationship with these caseworkers than you may have starting out. So sometimes they can say, hey, I've got a new CASA on this case. How's the best way to communicate with you? Is it better by text? Is it better by email? A lot of times they don't answer their phones or respond to messages. So I would do that step one. Step two, the advice to talk to the placement is wonderful because they know usually as much about what's going on as the caseworker does, and sometimes even more, because a lot of times the parents don't trust the caseworkers. Sometimes for a good reason, sometimes, just because they don't like the system. So if you talk to either the placement or the caseworker, the placement's got to keep, if it's like a kinship or a foster placement, they have to keep pretty specific notes about when the kids go to therapy, when they go to the doctor, so forth and so on. So you can get a lot of information that way also. So unfortunately, not everybody is an A-team player. And a lot of times you just have to keep up your end, keep giving them information on your visits so that they have that. They may not ever respond to you. But, try those levels. Try your peer coordinator or your advocate supervisor first. Let them try to talk to the other person. They may even have to go to their supervisor at some cases because not all caseworkers are the same.
Okay.
Nor GALs either, for that matter.
Yes,
So
yes, and the GAL is also unresponsive and it's a foster placement. So it's hard to get information.
Yeah, hang in there, hang in there.
GAL doesn't have to see their child. I think the caseworker has to see eyes on where the child is bedding, living at least once a month. I don't think the GAL has that kind of guidelines. They're very much limited to, maybe once every time between court hearings or something like that. So they may not have as much information because a lot of times in court, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of times they'll listen to what everybody else is saying, and then they'll say, oh yeah, I saw the child and this and this and this, when actually they've just read your report and are parroting what you said. So, unfortunately, that's not the best for the child. But that's the fact, and it's been that way for X amount of years, and I don't see it changing. So, you got to do what you have to do. You need to be a little forceful sometimes, and if that doesn't work, then you got to do your own thing. You got to be an independent investigator.
Okay. Okay. And then to follow that up, this case is actually, there's a criminal case that is running in conjunction to the county. The county's case is going to trial because the parents are not admitting guilt. Is there any interplay between the criminal case and the county's case? And how do the results of the criminal case affect the county's case? Does anybody know on that?
So the criminal
This is-
charges are pending because of what happened to the kiddo?
Say that again, Becca?
So are the criminal charges pending because of what happened to the kiddo?
Yes.
It's
Yes,
it's okay,
directly related to the kiddo.
directly related. I'm gonna give this to Chris. Go for it.
Well, there is a statute, I think it's called 193207, which kind of protects the parent in the dependency and neglect case from that information going into the criminal case, because they're two separate, they're similar but different kind of cases. In Broomfield, we have the same district judge for a lot of criminal and dependency and neglect cases, so they kind of know what's going on. In Adams County, you have completely different courtrooms. So, it depends if a child is called to testify or not in the criminal case, but it's kind of a slippery slope because what the parent says in one case could affect the other case. So their attorney's probably going to try and keep them from saying too much. They probably won't want them to do evaluations. So, I don't know if there's a lot that can be done. You can actually go to their criminal case, trial if you want to. I mean, you just find out what the case number is and you can access that. So you could find out what's going on. But, I don't know if that answers your question or not. There is some interplay, but they try and keep them separate
Okay.
on separate tracks.
So would a guilty verdict in a criminal case automatically, I guess what I'm concerned about is, can we get a guilty verdict in a criminal case, but then a not guilty in dependency and neglect? And there's a
Well,
loophole there?
dependency and neglect is a civil case, so you're not going to get a guilty or not guilty.
Gotcha. Okay.
You're going to get in the criminal case, you're going to get guilty or not guilty, but in a civil case. So because he's been found guilty in the one case, he may get parole, they may get probation, they may get sentenced. Now, if they get sentenced, that'll affect their dependency and neglect case because that affects following the treatment plan, that affects visits with their kids, it affects a lot of different things like that. But just because he's found guilty in one doesn't mean that they're guilty in the other. They still have that civil case to go through.
Okay.
So, so those courts are separate, so they each have their own set of rules.
Okay.
And sometimes those rules don't match up.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. And in the civil case, just so I'm understanding correctly, if they're essentially, I guess, not found guilty, but they're found guilty in the civil case, that just means that
Adjudicated.
they have to comply with the dependency neglect court orders. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay.
Sometimes if the person is on probation and he has specific things he has to do for probation, like let's say, for example, UAs. Probation may require UAs. The department may require UAs. So sometimes they'll meet in the middle so that this person's not doing a zillion UAs a month. They'll try and coordinate that so that as part of his treatment plan or her treatment plan, they'll do what they need to do for UAs or therapy or, different things like that.
That is a great question. And I was going to follow up with that. If, let's say, they do whatever, maybe they do have to follow now probation or whatever, and that directly impacts their their treatment plan, right? Do we go back and redo the treatment plan? Is there a process that says, well, this doesn't make any sense anymore, or this is not
They may,
okay.
if the caseworker is on top of it and will work with the probation officer, that might happen. Other times, if the caseworker is not on top of it, and the guy or the woman's doing, the mom or the dad's doing one thing for probation and one thing for somebody down the road should catch that, because that's duplication of services. It's costing us money, basically. And, like you said before, these parents have a lot of stuff to do. and you throw in another couple things from probation to do, how do you find time to even have a life, so to speak? So,
Right.
so yeah, they may reevaluate the treatment plan based on what happened in criminal court, especially if the person is sentenced to some type of jail time, criminal time.
Okay.
Really interesting question. Thank you, Nicole. It's not
Yeah,
something
thank
that
you
comes
for
up
your
very often.
answers.
Great.
And then-
Anybody else want to weigh in that or follow up? Did you get all your questions asked, Nicole?
Well, my last question, and I don't want to monopolize what time we have left, so we can certainly come back to it if we have time. I would just like to know what it's like to be a day in the life of a peer coordinator, because it's something I'm interested in.
Well, I'll let the peer coordinators take this.
I'm just gonna say, Candy, you've been a peer coordinator late, longer than I have, and I've talked a lot more. I'll let you start.
Okay, I think when you first start out being a peer coordinator, you only have one advocate that you're supervising. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time. The things that you're expected to do as a peer coordinator are edit court reports, go to court with your advocate and take notes for them, be there for resources when they need something. I just mentioned earlier that I'm going to attend an FTM for one of my advocates tomorrow because she can't be there for that. We don't have to do that, but we can if we want to support our advocates that way. The more advocates you get, the more, obviously, the more time it takes, but I really, really like having interactions with other advocates because I get to see things that they do that I hadn't thought about. I get to see a whole lot of different approaches to different things. I don't know, I really, really like it. I've had a wonderful experience with most of my advocates. Some of them takes a little more needle prodding to get them to get their reports done and submitted on time, or to be sure that they're making their visits. Otherwise, I think it's so wonderful to be able to see so many different cases and so many different approaches to it.
Judy.
I agree with what Candy said. I had my training to become a peer coordinator in March. So I got my first advocate in April, and I still had my case, which my case takes longer than, working with my advocate says. But then I got my second advocate in Karen. I'm not sure. I can't remember when you joined, but probably June or July, early July, something like that. So there are some weeks that are busier than others, but so far I have not been overwhelmed at all. Again, I think my case still takes a lot more time, but it is a very involved case. So, but I've loved getting to know Karen. We met for coffee once, and I have not met my other one in person yet because of her schedule, but hopefully we can meet soon. But it is kind of hard because you just can't meet in person so much now as you'd like to because of COVID, but it's really a neat thing. And I've learned things from Karen. I've learned things from my other advocate. And I think it's always a learning process. So I've enjoyed it so far.
Thank you, guys. That sounds so exciting.
Sounds like Nicole might be a potential peer coordinator.
Definitely.
I will send an email to Paula. Wow, just looked at the time. This is great. Karen, Cheryl, Kirk, did you guys have any questions for the panel of things that you would like clarification, their opinion on, something that you would like them to weigh in on? I do have a couple things that come up in pre-service, so I'm going to present those questions to you all seasoned, and that is home safety. We get a lot of questions about walking into a home where you're not quite sure how many people are in the house at the time. We're not quite sure how they feel about us being there. We might even have a history of domestic violence in the family, and maybe dad's still in the home or mom's still in the home, or so we have some of these things that kind of linger. Do you guys, can you take a minute and speak to those advocates who might be nervous about going into a home with some of these unknowns?
I hate to always be the one talking, but actually that was a fear of mine too. But I think one thing that really helps is the family knows when you know that you're a volunteer and that you're fighting for the kiddos. You are the kiddos' voice. And I have had families just really kiss up to me, because they know that it's really important that they make a good impression on the CASA, because you're going to make recommendations where that child needs to be. And so I was leery about this at first. And then as I've been working these cases, everybody has been over the top nice to me, because they just know that what a CASA says carries a lot of weight with the judge where the kiddo needs to be, if that helps.
Sounds like you've had the opposite experience where people are you're very comfortable with you being there. That's great. That's good.
And I would say when I did my first training, we were told that if you don't feel comfortable going into a home, don't go. Just don't go. Another thing I would say is go with someone. The caseworker has to be there at least once a month. So plan a time when you can go with the caseworker to get in there and just to feel it out and see how it is, or the GL, or your CASA supervisor. I was always told that my supervisor would go with me if I wanted her to. And I have put that out there for my advocates too, that I would go with them for their first visit on a case if they wanted to. I think sometimes you just feel better if you're not alone. So I think that's always an option for you too.
I guess my take on the home visit, thinking back over so far the 3 environments that I've been exposed to, in my mind, the reality of it is if I were to visit and say, well, gosh, seems like you ought to have a lock on that door, or, maybe you ought to put those butcher knives away where the kid can't see them. They're not going to, as Judy alluded to, me coming in and making those kind of comments, in my mind, is either going to create some resentment. If I mention it at all, it may be in passing, but it does have an impact on what I put in my report and the concerns I expressed to my peer coordinator and to the GAL and to the caseworker. So I guess I'm more, I want to be there at least the first time with the GAL or the caseworker to create a comfort level. And then my focus is, do the kids seem to be safe? If there's an issue there, then that's going to go back to the caseworker and the GAL, because they're the ones, frankly, with the authority to actually make something happen if it has to happen.
Good, thanks. Chris? Oh, sorry.
I think what Bob was saying, is very accurate, is to go first with, if you can, with the GAL or the caseworker. Sometimes there's a foster coordinator that has to be in the house, I think also once a month. If you can find out who that person is, that's the support person for the foster people, for the foster families. So you could go in with any of them. And I like to go with one of them because normally they've already met the family and they, have got somewhat of a relationship anyway, so that you're not just going in by yourself and say, hey, here I am. I always advise my new advocates on a case to send a what is CASA to the family, to the parents, to the kids if they're old enough to read. You can either send it snail mail, you can send it email if the parents, have an email account that you can get. Because that kind of at least breaks the path for the CASA to go. They kind of know what your job is. And then you can go over it with them when you're there. And you can find that on our webpage under ongoing advocates. So it is a tough thing. That when I do interviews, that's the biggest question that comes up is safety going into the home. And am I going to be safe? And sometimes it's not so much the advocate that I'm interviewing, but it's their spouse that's concerned. You know, they're concerned about, are you going to be safe when you go into some stranger's house? So like somebody said, the biggest way is that if you're not comfortable, you leave the house. And if there are child protection issues, you call the hotline. If it's like a 911 emergency, you call 911 right away, but you get out of the house. If you're not, you know, if you see guns laying around, you mentioned knives. If there's kids in the home, I would call 911 right away, especially with guns, or if you see drugs around, anything like that, but get out of the house and call. I mean, those are extreme examples. I don't think we've ever lost a CASA. We have some CASAs that have kind of contentious relationship with some of the people on the cases, but you know, that's all right. Everybody knows that the parents are a little wacko anyway. So, you know, they take what they say with a grain of salt, but don't be afraid, just be smart. I think it's the best thing to say. Think about it, think it through.
Also, often, if you don't feel safe, right, don't. I haven't come across this as a CASA, but I'm a retired clinical social worker, so I've come across it a lot in work. And there are always a lot of other places you can meet. And we found libraries to be a great place because often they have study rooms. So you can reserve a room and whatever you talk about is confidential. So there's always, the local library is always a great place. If anything doesn't feel comfortable, then you can meet with families in libraries. Sometimes fast food, because you can buy them food and that can be a bridge, but it's not as confidential there. So sometimes that, you know, like just finding a place like that can be really helpful until you do feel more comfortable, if you do.
Well, and you'll find the kiddos might open up to you more if you take them out of the house. If you go for a walk around the block or you go to the playground or something like that, the kiddo is out of the house and is out of the eyes and ears of whoever they're staying with, and they may open up more to you. So that's a great idea to take them off site. You can't drive them anywhere, but you can always walk. You know, you can check out the neighborhood before you get in there and figure out where you could walk to, and, you know, just do that.
Great. Thank you. We are coming close to the end of our time together, so I'm going to let Kirk ask his question.
Okay, and I think this is one that would have a fairly quick answer. And at this point, it's a hypothetical. I was hoping during the summer break to get 2 of my kiddos out on an outing before the school year started. Not surprisingly, the aunt that they're living with, who has taken aversion to me and or CASA program, has said, no, we've got plans. But hypothetically, if I were to take them, like I was thinking, the Butterfly Pavilion, my background is with a youth organization in which I have been an adult trainer, which is focused a lot on youth protection. So the idea of me individually being in a car with 2 kids raises all sorts of warning bells in my head. Is it appropriate for me to say, ask Bob to come along with me, another adult who is not involved in the case, to be a company?
No, I'll defer to the panel. But part of it's confidentiality. Part of it, you know, is we want to protect the kids. So we do have people who want to introduce the kids to their families or to do an outing with a family, and it's just not something that we allow. But I will let somebody who maybe can give more details or background or ways to get around that or something,
Yep.
maybe. Chris, can you tackle this?
I had a feeling that was the case, but the youth protection thing is so well ingrained in me that I'm caught not being able to.
Yeah,
Well, and that's one reason why we don't really encourage transporting, driving kids, because like you said, it's a slippery slope there too, because if you have a child who's been raised in an environment of not telling the truth, all of a sudden, well, we were in the car and he did this or he did that, and there you go. I mean, all it takes is those accusations. So we really encourage that. Now, unfortunately, the aunt's not a good supporter. I was going to say you could have the foster parents drop them off at the Butterfly Pavilion, or you could have, you know, maybe the GAL would go with you or the caseworker would go with you. Maybe they need a break, something like that. You know, that's always an option to look at, to think about too. You know, it's kind of far-fetched, but it may work, who knows?
Okay, well,
But
that
Becca is
defines
very
some
right about the
parameters for me.
confidentiality.
yeah.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Well, we're coming up to the end of our time. I just want to thank you all so much for participating. I hope that you got something out of this. I really, really am grateful to the panelists. What a great wealth of knowledge you guys are. I think this is going to be really helpful. At this point, I'm going to stop recording. If it'll let me.